And certainly on behalf of all of the MACC presidents, are happy to welcome you today to our CCBC Catonsville campus and to the 5th MACC Completion Summit. So the day might be a little dreary outside, but it's going to be pretty electric in here. We have two great speakers, two presidents who have actually led their colleges through the kinds of efforts we're going to be making. A lot of great best practices workshops, all pointing to the good work being done in Maryland. And as an extra treat, we anticipate a visit from Governor O'Malley, an education governor, if there ever was one. So our folks have been working hard to make sure you have a great day. We will feed you well. We will make sure you can find your way. And if you have questions, just look for someone dressed like me, red and black. This is our signature ask your questions here look. We also have these little, this is the Maryland flag look, if you haven't noticed, and the Preakness look, I think. But do me a favor, try not to ask me a question. Ask them. They'll know the answers. So let me take a few minutes to frame the issues that we're going to be discussing today. We're having some rather hard-hitting conversations in Maryland about developmental education and what we will be doing about that. But our prior summits, the first 3, as a matter of fact, focused, as you would expect them to, on completion, on the exit point for students. And before I continue, my friends, would you please look at the success that we have had since the governor issued his challenge. Our degrees have increased across our sector by 38%, certificates by 47%. Let's give ourselves some applause. That's what we do, isn't it? Tell us we have to do something, and we do it. So we've made great progress. Last year, we actually took on a discussion of the SB 740 legislation, and we had some good conversation about that, although academics never really like legislators telling us what to do. The truth is that our SB 740 has positioned us right smack dab in the middle of Maryland's P through 20 continuum, and it puts us right at the heart, right at the nexus of Maryland's workforce and completion agendas. So today, we're going to try to bring that same intelligence and energy to focus on developmental education. Now, let me take a little segue to tell you this. Yesterday, I was very pleased to once again have the heady experience of being invited to the White House Summit on Advancing Educational Opportunity for Low-Income and Minority Students. This was a follow-up day from one that convened in January, the first summit in January, when 100 college presidents were invited to the White House. Only 10 were community college presidents. And we quickly gathered together and we figured out that we were sort of an afterthought as invitees because they didn't even have name tags for us. But yesterday, the conversation was so different. The role that community colleges play as the premier access point for low-income and minority students to take advantage of higher education in the United States of America was on everyone's lips. And that felt really good, because those of us who were there in January, even though we were few, we were mighty. And we made it very clear to the president and to his staff and to all the presidents from Yale and Harvard who were there that if you really want to make this happen, if you really want to increase the number of low-income and minority students who will make their way to a degree, a certificate, or a workplace certification, you can't do it without us. Because millions pass through our doors. We can do what Yale cannot. We can do what MIT and Harvard cannot. We can do what even College Park can't do. Without us, this goal just isn't attainable. So my head is still spinning from all those conversations yesterday, that we who have gone from being from the wrong side of the ivory tower have now achieved a position of real prominence in the goal set by the president, set by our governor, and it felt really good. But the other topic that was on everyone's lips yesterday is, what are you going to do about developmental education to turn it from a barrier to the real helpmeet and support for students who do indeed need some college readiness work before they are ready to enter the gateway courses. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame that we do this and we do it very well, and there is no shame for the students who actually do need some help before they're ready. So what it came down to yesterday, and I think what it comes down today, look how smart your presidents are. How did we know that the very next day after the president issues some kind of edict, we're going to be talking about it? I mean, that's how good we are. But we know if you want to get more students out of the pipeline, you first have to get them in. And then you have to get them through. And the sense is strong, even in our own state, that too many community college students get lost in the morass of developmental course sequences, and too few of them ever come out the other end as graduates. So we have SB 740 in Maryland, but states like Connecticut, Florida, and Ohio have taken these decisions out of the hands of their academic communities and have either abolished developmental education or made it optional. Both very bad ideas, given who our students are. The many adult students who've been out of high school for many years. So that refrain about states paying twice for the same instruction for our students simply doesn't have resonance. But what does have resonance is that strident voices are saying, strident voices across the nation are saying that our colleges are milking developmental education as a cash cow and demeaning our efforts at placement by sarcastically referring to the AccuPlacer as the $3 test. So as presidents in Maryland, we actually thought, even before President Obama made his statements yesterday, that it's time for Maryland to use the community, to use our completion summit to focus on entry as well as exit. Addressing remediation as barrier will indeed lead to improved retention, which will lead to improved completion. So the task is simple. This is what we're going to focus on today. How do you reduce the number of students who enter our colleges who need a lengthy developmental sequence? And if they do, how do you accelerate their progress through not only the developmental sequence, but through the gateway courses? So we know that our colleges in Maryland have done a lot of good work about this. Our two speakers today will share their experiences about the good work they have done. And I would say, and I'm not the only one in this room who is old enough to say that, I and others in this room were the pioneers in the Maryland Community College system who actually created mandatory assessment and placement and the developmental sequence. That was right for the time, and it is still right. But through the 1980s, what we kind of did, what we overdid, we created an overripe system that now keeps too many students out of the credit course continuum and forces too many students to spend too much time in layered classes that actually is the metaphorical equivalent of simply dropping them down a well. they get discouraged, they disappear. That doesn't mean they would all be successful if we did something different, but it does mean that the challenge that we have is to try, in a very real way, to find some intelligent, credible ways to address this challenge. Because it's not going away. It's not going away. The really nice thing is, we don't need million-dollar consultants to do this. We've got you. We've got you. We've got the talent, the strength, the grit, the determination, and the commitment of community college professionals all over the state of Maryland who are going to help us do this. And not just do it for 25 or 100 students, but do it for the thousands of students who come into our classrooms every single year. Our governor is not here yet, but I always like to quote him. He said early on during our fiscally tough times, in times of challenge, we don't make excuses, we make progress. So I think that's the spirit with which your presidents put this issue on the table. There are meaningful ways, things we can do. We're going to hear about some of them today, things we can do to actually meaningfully increase the number of students who do not need the developmental sequence, and if they do, who will move through more quickly. I just think that's symptomatic of the can-do spirit that we have. You know, criticism stings, but it can surely spur action. And this whole remedial issue has become one of our Achilles' heels. And we know that we can address it. We know it's time for a whole new generation of Maryland Community College pioneers to figure out what is the right way in the 21st century to be providing the kind of placement and developmental support that so many of our students will need. And if we don't, you know that old Moms Mabley saying, if you keep on a-doing what you been doing, you keep on a-getting what you been getting. Well, we don't want that. This is a great time to be a community college professional, and it's an even greater time to be a community college professional in Maryland. So I will close my comments this morning with what has become one of my favorite images to encourage community college professionals like all of us to move bravely into the future. We all know that our Ravens won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and we know our Ravens are going to win the Super Bowl again. But when they defeated not this year, all right, maybe next year, but here's the point. When they did win, and they did, and we were all pretty proud, I remember our coach saying, Baltimore is a rough and tumble town. The Ravens are a rough and tumble team. He said, never perfect, never pretty, but we get the job done. That's us, my friends. Every community college professional in this room. Never perfect, never pretty, but we get the job done. So enjoy the conversation, the presentations that will take place today. These are pretty meaningful conversations for all of us. We're happy that you are here to spend a little time thinking about these important issues that are really not only important to us, but they are important to the 500,000 Marylanders who every year come and sit and study and learn in our classrooms. So with that, I'm going to invite our MACC President Chair, President Kate Hetherington, the President of Howard Community College, and she's going to take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you here today. We have a very exciting program scheduled for today and a lot to do. I am going to take some time to acknowledge some folks in the audience and introduce our speakers. And in between our speakers, we will probably have Governor O'Malley arriving. So first of all, let me start off by thanking Dr. Kurtinitis for hosting yet another MACC Summit on Completion. This is the 5th summit, and it's been held at the Community College of Baltimore County 4 times. And not only Dr. Kurtinitis, but her staff does such a great job of making us feel so welcome. So let's give a round of applause for them. Before I introduce today's keynote speakers, I'd like to recognize some other folks that are in the audience, and I'll give their names first. Kathy Schultz, the Acting Secretary of Higher Education, and members of her staff. Dr. Jennifer Frank, the Assistant Secretary. Benet Edwards, the Grants Manager, and Greg Fitzgerald, Chief of Staff. In addition, we have Garrett Halbach from the Department of Legislative Services. Will these folks please stand to be recognized? Also at this time, I would like to introduce each of our community college presidents, and I am going to ask that they stand along with their teams. And we'll start with Cindy Bombera and the folks from Allegheny College of Maryland. Dawn Lindsay and her guest from Sichuan Telecommunications College in China. They are visiting the United States, and all the great people from Anne Arundel Community College. And now we have one of our newer presidents, Gordon May, Baltimore City Community College, and his team. Another new president, Dr. Jim Ball, and his team from Carroll Community College. And another new president, Mary Bolt, and her team from Cecil College, and her trustee, Donna Horgan. Not so new president, Brad Gottfried and his team from the College of Southern Maryland. And of course, Dr. Sandra Kurtinitis and her very gracious team from Community College of Baltimore County. New president, Libby Burmaster and her team from Frederick Community College. Rick McLennan and his team from Garrett College. Guy Altieri and the good folks from Hagerstown Community College. Darian Pollard and her team from Montgomery College. Barbara Vinier and her team from Chesapeake College. Dennis Galladay and his folks from Hartford Community College. Charlene Dukes and her team from Prince George's Community College. Ray Hoy and the folks from Warwick Community College. And of course, my team from Howard Community College. Please rise and be recognized. And I'd like to thank, of course, Bernie Sadusky and the MACC staff for all the good work that they do. As Sandra explained, this year's summit is dedicated to addressing developmental education, which has certainly become a hot-button issue for all post-secondary education and training across the nation, but particularly for community colleges with our open access mission. And while we've been doing much to ensure that students are prepared for college-level work, there's always more to do. I am pleased to introduce two keynote speakers who are going to help us understand what they've done in their states, and we're going to learn so much from them. They've gone to great lengths to introduce policies and practices on their campuses to address the needs of a growing number of entering students being college-ready. Dr. Karen Stout, President of Montgomery County Community College in Pennsylvania, and Dr. Robert Templin, President of Northern Virginia Community College. They are presenters. I will give you some background on them. Karen asked me before I began, please don't read my whole resume. Well, quite frankly, if I had to do it, it would be all this. I mean, she just has such an impressive background. And I first met Karen back in 1990. We went through a leaders program together, and we have been good friends since then. She has such an impressive background. She serves on numerous advisory committees and commissions. What's particularly interesting for today's meeting is that Karen is now doing some really interesting work with the Community College Research Center, and in fact, she chairs that center. And if you've ever seen any of her writings, you know what impressive work that she does in getting information and making sure that it's easy to understand and comprehend. She's a great presenter. She has firsthand knowledge on how these initiatives and programs are received, instituted, and measured on campus. And what you may not know about Karen is that she has strong Maryland ties. Her master's degree is from an institution right here in Maryland, the University of Baltimore. And in fact, she has taught at 2 community colleges, including CCBC and Hartford Community College. What will happen next is that we'll expect to hear from Governor O'Malley, who introduced the College Completion Initiative here in Maryland during his first term of office. And then Dr. Templin will follow. Again, he has such an impressive background and a biography that's almost like a dissertation. So it's, both of these biographies, by the way, are in your packet for review. For the past 5 years, Dr. Templin has served as the chairman of the Virginia Community College System's Re-Engineering Task Force that has been responsible for rethinking how Virginia's community colleges reach larger numbers of underserved students while producing significantly better completion outcomes for all students and reducing cost. And during that period, Virginia has completely revamped its assessment of college readiness and redesigned both its developmental math and developmental English programs. For the past 4 years, Dr. Templin has served as the chair of Achieving the Dream, and many of you are familiar with that organization. And I've been told that Dr. Templin will be retiring from NOVA on February 1st, and then he'll be joining the Aspen Institute's College Excellence Program as a senior fellow. So we appreciate that we will not be losing his expertise, and he will continue to give information to the growing body of data that we have on the effectiveness of efforts that we have in developmental education, among many other things. So with that, I will ask you to please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Karen Stout.
Well, good morning. It's great to be back in Maryland, where I spent the first decade of what has become a career in community colleges. My first position in community colleges was at Hartford Community College, which I call my hometown community college. And then I call my stay in Baltimore at, I say, Dundalk Community College, because it was in the days when the 3 community colleges in Baltimore County reported to, well, 3 presidents reported to 1 board. So it was before the reorganization of the system. Hartford is interesting because I was rejected 3 times for the first position that I got at Hartford in the admissions office, and it wasn't until Carl Henderson, who's in the audience, discovered me, he was the chair of the search committee, that I think rejected my application the first 3 times because I didn't have higher education experience. But it was my time at Hartford where I was able to not only be an administrator, but also teach and to coach that helped me catalyze my passion for community colleges. And my short stay at Dundalk, I was at Dundalk for about 18 months, just before the system reorganization, among many things, gave me my dissertation topic and an upfront look at how systems influence progress of colleges at the local level, whether those systems are formal or informal. So there's certainly a lot of context these days to help ground today's topic of rethinking pathways into credit coursework. And the title of the summit itself shows us really how far we've come in the last decade. So really, this idea of reforming developmental education is not a fad. We've been in this work now for 10 years. But when we first started this work, we looked at the work as taking on developmental education as a discrete intervention. And we did not connect those reforms to the greater system. And we didn't think about planning those interventions necessarily at scale. And we've learned that in order to get the scale required for completion, we can't look at developmental education as just a discrete intervention, and we can't begin the work by not thinking about scale at the same time. So as a result, we're thinking more about pathways and more meaningful approaches to support what I'll call college readiness work, and developmental education is one piece of that work. Of course, this more holistic approach makes sense, and it's obvious in hindsight, but we are stubborn, and we needed to discover this obviousness really by trial and error. And much of it was trial and error of many of the early Achieving the Dream colleges who took the lead and jumped into the reform work in 2003, 2004, really thinking about the way to accelerate degree completion, especially for low-income students and students of color, would be to go at developmental education. And Montgomery was one of those early Achieving the Dream colleges, and we started our work in round 3, as a round 3 college in 2006, but had started some work in developmental education even before we joined Achieving the Dream. So just to give you a little bit of background, Montgomery is a suburban multi-campus community college located in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. In many ways, it is like Montgomery College here. I get mail from Montgomery College, so I have to make sure that I send it back. I think you get mail from Montgomery County Community College. Our service area is diverse economically and ethnically. We serve about 25,000 credit students annually at 2 primary campuses and at 2 specialized locations, and also through our virtual campus. And transfer really is in our historic DNA, but our program portfolio has grown to include occupational certificates, industry standard certifications, as well as a number of what I would call post-baccalaureate certificates and certifications. We see that about 30% of our new students actually already have an advanced degree of some kind. It's important that we on our campuses, so everybody in this room, presidents, academic leaders, trustees, it's important that we've jumped into this rethinking movement because just about everybody else has jumped into it too. We heard earlier about work in Connecticut and Ohio and Florida where they've really jumped past rethinking and have legislated the elimination or made optional developmental education. Wednesday's Chronicle highlights Florida's new law and the unintended consequences in an article titled "One State's Shakeup in Remedial Education Brings a Slew of Headaches." But in some cases, jumping ahead isn't necessarily fully a bad thing. We just don't know if it will work. There's really no research out there that looks at jumping past it. And we have little bits of research on how discrete interventions work, but we don't really have research yet on what the full system looks like and what is effective as a full comprehensive approach. So Maryland has taken, I think, a strong comprehensive approach to rethinking, simultaneously dealing with K through 12, community colleges, and 4-year institutions. Other states have taken on reform by creating performance funding models and trying to incent college behavior around completion. And some states, like Pennsylvania, have done very little legislatively to influence college behavior. Our colleges operate in varying contexts, and that's very important. At Montgomery, we are one of 14 independent community colleges with a board appointed fully by our local sponsor. So we're dealing with that context as we begin to look at reform, and we're in a state where there is not any type of coordinating body other than a commission that's fully voluntary. We don't have an MHEC, for example. So the context is important, and I think when President Templin talks about Virginia, it'll be a different context. So there's state context, and there's a whole lot of other other things that are going on around us with reform. And then there are two organizations, I think, that have really tried to help align some of the work, and that's Achieving the Dream and the American Association for Community Colleges, that have two theory of change frameworks that I think most of you are probably familiar with. And I made an attempt here to map the two so that you could see the commonalities between the two approaches. And the idea, I'm not going to go through the detail of this slide because this would take too long. The idea is that all of us need to figure out some type of theory of change on our campuses to lead this work. And then we have funders and researchers and think tank entities, and you see the funders in the circles and the researchers in the squares, and think tank is an example is Aspen, and then Achieving the Dream, which is really providing colleges strategic assistance, and AACC, which provides advocacy, all trying to help us with this work. But they're really not aligned. And that lack of alignment really does not help us locally in trying to discover alignment. And I think that that is part of our dilemma. So that's the context map of what's happening. And in a way, I'm trying to, here we go. So at Montgomery, we started this rethinking journey in 2005. And this is a map of some of our intervention work. We have 34 different interventions that we've moved forward. And you see on this slide one sample page of an inventory where we've categorized our interventions, we've archived them, and we've said the ones that we've decided not to move forward with and the ones that we're trying to move forward and scale. So this inventory supports continuity of 8 years worth of reform work on the campus, but it also kind of records what we've failed fast at doing. That's really important, that you fail fast, that you fail fast in order to succeed, that you put those measurements in place as you're doing your reform work, and that you fail fast, because that's the way that you get to success. So that looks very organized. It serves as good continuity too, as faculty come in and out of this work, and as administrators have come on and off of our campus, as we've had turnover, which is one of the challenges I think all of us have with this reform work. Now, this is the inventory done in a different way. This shows the chaos of it. So there's an organized look and then a chaotic look at it. And you'll see our interventions are around categories like acceleration, that's the triangles, the accurate placement in squares, the course redesign, and all of these are interventions that are in play to try to help us improve the rate of students getting through developmental education coursework. Course redesign, building a culture of evidence, which is in the purple, building strong policies, which is in the green and looks like home plate, because I'm an Oriole fan, and then student support, which is in kind of the clouds. In many ways, when I mapped these categories for these remarks, I was struck by how they map to many of the topics that are in your breakout sessions later this afternoon. So on Thanksgiving Day, my family played a game called In a Pickle. And this chart, the chart here reminds me of this game, and I'll tell you why. The game is one of creative thinking and the building of stories or scenarios. You pull discrete cards out of a deck and you try to create a story by fitting smaller things into bigger things. So here's how a successful hand might look. There is lint on my golf ball that is in the vacuum in my trunk. So I just pulled some cards, that's what I came up with. So in a way, when you look at this, you can think, we really are in a pickle in a lot of ways. Each intervention on this map is like a card in the game deck. Rethinking pathways requires that we connect the interventions, like the connection of in the pickle cards. Yet, how do we craft that type of coherence on our campuses when the field doesn't necessarily have the coherence and we are challenged to move the needle locally, campus by campus, so that Maryland can hit the completion targets that you've set, knowing that developmental education is a major barrier to getting to those completion targets. What elements are part of a successful pathway that leads to credit coursework? What fundamentals of college culture and support need to anchor the development and sustaining of this pathway. So for fun, let me try to answer that using an in-the-pickle approach. So PSSA exemptions plus SAT exemptions plus placement test changes equals academic readiness plus strategies for college success course plus supplemental instruction plus mentoring equals, plus early alert equals progression as measured by the voluntary framework for accountability. But that's trying to craft coherence of many of the interventions. So all joking aside, we all need a reformed map. We need to pull this together and have a change theory. And here's the map of our work at Montgomery. And you see the pre-college interventions, our assessment and placement reforms, curricular redesign work, academic supports, and then a piece on transitions, which really leads to the completion piece of the pathway. And then at the bottom, an anchor in really looking at the way we've designed enrollment and entry reforms. And that's really a big play we're making on the campus now around advising redesign. So I'm going to just quickly go into some of these interventions and show you some of the data so that you can get a sense for where we're headed at Montgomery. So in our pre-college intervention work, we're doing a lot with early testing in our high schools, and you're probably doing that too, being much more intentional with dual enrollment. When we started doing dual enrollment, we frankly just let the high schools tell us what they wanted, and we tried to meet the demand. We don't do that anymore. We're much more strategic and intentional. We are creating dual enrollment pathways so that we're really connecting the work in the high schools to the majors and pathways at Montgomery County Community College. We have several high schools that are working with us now on what I call 2+1+2 pathways. So in the junior and senior years of high school, they're getting 1 year of their associate degree and doing some college readiness work in that mix too. They come to Montgomery for 1 year, and then the transfer partners have bolted into that. We have one school district that even is sharing with us our Blackboard learning management system. So they're learning how to use that management system while in high school. And the superintendent is looking at this partnership with the college very publicly as a way to increase his college readiness and college success rates. So this just shows you some of the success we've had with improving yield rates at the institution from our high schools, because this does have enrollment benefits as well, and the growth in dual enrollment students, and then the change in college readiness, especially in English, where you see we've had a 63% increase in the number of students that are now college ready in English because of the work that we've been doing around this. You add on to that a lot of assessment and placement reform. So looking at multiple measures. AccuPlacer is no longer the primary mechanism for placement at Montgomery County Community College, and this change was driven fully by our faculty. It took a long time. We know a lot now. We know a lot from Community College Research Center about the accuracy of placement tests. We should be really fully thinking about abandoning those. We don't have to do our own research on our campuses anymore to learn what the national research is telling us. We don't have to replicate that work anymore. So we've quickly abandoned the placement test protocols that we've had. We have a new academic readiness policy, and you can see just in developmental English the level of college English placement and how it's changed. And in addition to that, then measuring whether these students are successful in the paired pathway courses. And they are just as successful when they come in through a non-traditional kind of assessment mechanism. Developmental math placement, very similar. We're seeing some decreases in developmental math placement as well. We're now looking at high school transcripts as a way for placement for math. That if students have taken Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and they have a final year of math in the senior year, there's continuity, we're immediately putting them into college level math. And I don't have the pathways mapped here to show you, the faculty in our math area have done a lot of work with our advisors in mapping the appropriate math pathways by STEM majors, non-STEM majors, and business majors, so that it's very clear. It took us a lot of time to get to those clear maps, but they're very important. This is an example in biology where we have anatomy and physiology being a major gatekeeper for success for our health science majors. And we were recognizing that students that came out of high school with high school biology only had a 38% success rate in anatomy and physiology. But if they took our Bio 121 class, they had a 73% success rate. So our faculty was trying to figure out a way, without creating too much of a barrier, that we could do some type of biology assessment in addition to looking at the high school transcript, and do a quick boot camp to help students accelerate if the placement test that we designed on campus showed that they had some deficiency. And that placement test, and we've tested it out, has some accuracy, and we're working with some other institutions to take that biology assessment out on the road to help other institutions that are looking at barriers like that. We have done a lot of work around pedagogy. We have a Gateway Academy for our faculty where we give them the data about what's happening with students in their courses, and we're helping them to dig in and drill in to do full redesign of their courses. And one of the most successful redesigns is at the lowest part of our developmental math sequence, which is Math 010. It's called Concepts of Math. We fully have flipped the way that course is taught. It's had tremendous success rates. It's fully scaled at the institution now. This was a really political debate on our campus with the math faculty, and it took us several years to get to scale, but we finally did get to scale, but again, led by the faculty. And now we're doing work with a Hewlett grant with 20 other community colleges across the country who are having similar success rate results. And if anybody's interested in learning more about that, I'd be willing to share that offline. Academic supports, we have a minority male mentoring program that we see a lot of improvement in persistence with students that go through the mentoring program, but not academic progress, meaning grade point average yet. So we're looking at this and adding more supports. But this also has been very important to decreasing the number of students coming in through developmental education. And then we have our early work around advising redesign. And this is a process map of the way that we've re-engineered first-time student entry into Montgomery. And you can see the flow chart. But what's really interesting then is we've laid all of the technology that supports a student's progress through the institution or into the college. And look at all those different platforms of technology. They don't speak to one another. You can't get the analytics that you need in order to make the interventions that you need to make on time. So we have a Gates grant, and Prince George's Community College also is as part of this cohort of colleges working to revamp advising and to create those early alert systems with the right kind of data from systems that are connected so that we can make the interventions that we need to make at the right time. So we've done a lot of work at Montgomery, and in the end, we are seeing terrific improvements in persistence, especially for new students who are coming in and getting kind of the full treatment, the full in-the-pickle treatment. The students that are new, our persistence rates are up 10%, and we've had sustained increases in our graduation rates with those cohorts and in compressed periods of time. This is a look at what a student sees with our new advising system. So they get data. They get data about the progress they're making and how far off they are with their completion map. And students can also do 2-year or 18-month or 3-year grids, and then those grids drop into a daily schedule, and now advisors are working with them on other topics and not on schedule building. So as I mentioned earlier, this really for us is the beginning. Our Student Success Initiative work is really focusing on IPASS at this point. I feel like that's our big play. I think having students with a full 2-year look at a completion plan, giving them the data, helping them have self-serve scheduling opportunities, making the pathways clear, including the dev ed pathways, making costs apparent at the very beginning, having career counseling at the very beginning. And then other work that we still haven't touched on, connecting pathways to the labor market value, continuing to compress our degree programs to 60 credits, finding new pathways for English as second language students, finding new pathways for ABE students, finding new ways to use prior learning assessment and CBE. We have a new a program that's being funded by Walmart to help us with a full one program that's fully CBE based. And we're really struggling with how we look at college readiness within that perspective. We also need to be thinking about access and equity, looking at the data around educational attainment issues for African American and Hispanic Latino students, looking at our financial aid supports to make sure students get the money that they need and the time that they need, and a real effective focus on pedagogy. Organizing for this work is really important. What does it look like on a local campus that's doing this work and rethinking it and doing it somewhat at scale? And I see 4 fundamentals that are imperative and that anchor our work at Montgomery. You may see these fundamentals in action on your campus, and there may be others that need to go on this list. But the first is the power of networks. As a leader, I rely more on networks than on the formal hierarchy to drive change. Hierarchies are important and are effective when we're managing routine functions, but they are not designed to help us live into ambiguity. Networks give our colleges a fluid structure. So what you see here is a network in action at the college. The SSI team at the middle of the chart is the anchor of our student success work. That group's been in existence for 8 years now, and they have rotating membership with some constant membership, but they're constantly looking at our data and trying to figure out what parts of the pathway need to be put in place. So we have some working groups right now around the Student Success Initiative. Those are all working on pre-college interventions to help us accelerate completion through developmental education. And then that network connects to governance. So we're not doing this work outside of governance, but we're not doing it inside the organizational hierarchy either. The second is the power of alignment. So we have a strategic plan with 6 goals and well-defined critical success factors all around student success. And they drive out our annual goals, which then relate to faculty evaluation, which we just fully redesigned our faculty evaluation process. And they relate to administrative evaluation and a redesign of our performance management process for administrators, which include 5 behavioral competencies and student success and stakeholder awareness. Attention to stakeholders is one of the key drivers for the behavioral competencies. And we're hoping that that alignment will help us accelerate our student success work. And then I'm a big believer in data and building a culture of evidence, and this is just a map of an ecosystem at work at Montgomery where we have our planning in place, we have structures and systems for data analysis, we have a lot of training in place with our IR team, but also with faculty, because I think that's a good way to build engagement, is to get the faculty the data, have it real time on their desktops, and then the tools that we need in order to really help us ask those calls to wonder questions on our campuses. And then the final anchor for success is the power of engagement. So really, to get systemic results, our faculty must be driving this rethinking. They have to be at the center of the rethinking work. And while all the strategies on this matrix aren't synchronized at Montgomery yet, we're working in all 4 quadrants to engage faculty in the work, full and part-time faculty. So really paying attention to what we're doing with hiring and onboarding and mentoring faculty. Professional development and aligning all of our professional development work with student success. Evaluation. I talked earlier about the redesign of faculty evaluation. It was done by faculty, not fully popular. This is the first year that we're into the evaluation process for faculty, but it really does hook very closely to the student success goals. And then governance, making sure that all of this work is hooked in to a shared governance model that is including the faculty. So we're learning lessons from this work. First, as leaders, and all of us are leaders on our campuses, we have to get on the balcony. There's a great book called Leadership on the Line, where this is one of the first characteristics of leadership. It's important for us to be able to step back and onto the balcony to get perspective while also remaining fiercely engaged in this work. Great athletes at once play the game and they observe it. They do both while they're in the game. Leaders must be both in and out of the game, moving back and forth. So faculty, in your content areas, you're in the game, you have to move out of the game, move back and forth. Keep that tension. Keep asking yourself. The work is iterative, it's not static, and it's enduring. Second, we can run parallel systems with some of our pilots, and you probably have a lot of pilot work on your campuses, but we have to be willing to flip the switch when the tipping point is reached. I liken this approach to designing and turning on a new ERP system, when for some period of time, for safety and testing, both systems need to run in parallel. But the switch has to be flipped for the new system to work and for it to run at scale. Third, we have to resist the urge to argue with our data. Accept your story and move forward. Colleges, we all need to start work where we are, just like we say with our students. This requires knowing where you are and confronting the reality of where you are. And fourth, everything begins local and ends local, whether there's a system or not. Your story is different than Montgomery's story, Montgomery and Pennsylvania's story. Your interventions and your pathways for rethinking will look different than what I've shared from Montgomery. If you have not designed your own institutional theory of change, go back to that reform map that I use at Montgomery, design one now. Your institution needs a common vocabulary and guiding principles to anchor your own rethinking. So in closing, we have to address this work with urgency and patience. How do the two fit together? One of my students reminded me that retention for her is defined as tomorrow. Not as from fall to spring, not as from fall to fall. And you know those students. Yet culture building and crafting and testing a comprehensive approach to reform is time consuming. And we face the need, really, to move forward with urgency and patience, even as we face many critics and cynics, even as we hear from the field about what we should do and shouldn't do, and even as we face the cynics and critics on our own campuses. So I have this Life magazine cover from 1945 framed and in my office as a reminder of the importance of the work. It kind of grounds me. It gives me a sense of urgency and also a little bit of patience when I need it. So we're only in a pickle if we lack the creativity and tenacity to rethink and build more effective pathways to a credential. So I pulled some discrete cards out of the deck, and with a little creativity and a lot of tenacity, was able to build this story. A student in kindergarten with the will and the money and the brains can get through school to move the needle on completion so that we can reclaim the American dream of a college degree for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. As always, you do such a great job of explaining things that are quite complex, and I appreciate the fact that we do have to have patience, but there's also a sense of urgency in everything that we do. I'd like to just update you on what's going on with the program. We're going to have Dr. Templin come up next. We are anticipating that the governor should be here roughly around 11:15. When Dr. Templin has finished his remarks, we'll make the award to the governor, and then we'll invite both Dr. Templin and Dr. Stout here to the stage to answer questions that you have. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bob Templin.
Flexibility, right? Well, I have a story that will beat Karen's regarding my roots in Maryland. So Karen, Harford County is my hometown. And Harford Community College was my community college as a student before being an employee. You know, I've thought with a few other colleagues of mine who have been at Harford at one time or another, but I believe that Harford Community College has given rise to more community college presidents than any other institution I know. So my hat's off to Harford Fighting Owls. You're going to see a lot of similarity, even though very different states, highly decentralized, Virginia highly centralized. The approach that we took was a little bit different. Ours was a statewide approach with local adaptations. Yours was completely an institutional support. But the journey was very, very similar. The questions were very, very much the same. And the conclusions, Karen and I have never really presented together before, the conclusions also are very similar. So I want to tell you a little bit about Northern Virginia Community College. We're the largest institution of higher education in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area, but we're one of 23 state-supported community colleges with a single governing board, but a local advisory board that helps us to adapt state policies to the local realities. We have 6 campuses throughout the Northern Virginia area and 5 specialty centers. We have about 78,000 credit students on an annual basis. We're extremely diverse. We are the largest minority-serving institution in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have more undergraduate African-American students than our 2 historically black universities combined. We have more black students than Howard University and the University of District of Columbia combined. Over 1/3 of all Latino students in higher education in Virginia are at Nova. And we grant more associate degrees to Asian Americans than any other college or university in America. So we have very large minority populations, but even with that diversity, very diverse within that. And with that diversity comes significant challenges, particularly for second language learners. As Karen indicated, our effort is that of grounding developmental education in a larger context. When we started working on developmental education, as did she, the notion was if we could fix developmental education, we would change the outcome for students. And the fact of the matter is, it's a little bit like hoping to increase your mileage on your car by changing your tires, but not tuning your engine. I mean, you got to do both if you're going to optimally run. So these are not all of the interventions that we have, but they're the most significant ones. The first dealing with the pre-collegiate experience that students have before they come to the college. And that means that we have to be involved in the lives of adults and high school students long before they come. And rather than just activity, it has to be very, very intentional, and it has to be designed together. In fact, the term that I'm with greater frequently using, the challenge that we have is that we have to, completion doesn't stand by itself either. We have to reach into populations that have historically been underserved and work with even more diverse students than before. The outcomes that we're achieving have to be significantly better than before. And we all have to do that within the context of declining or reducing cost. And we have to do all three. And from where we sit today, that seems almost impossible. Reaching new students who are historically underprepared, significantly better outcomes for them at a declining cost. And we cannot solve that problem inside our institution the way we've been doing it. The best hope that we have is something that I use called collective impact. That is, recognizing that it takes partners working with us around a common outcome if we hope to achieve it. So, for example, if we want to reduce remediation or eliminate it, we have to work with our school systems. They have to jointly own with us the goal of college readiness, and beyond that, college success. High school should measure how they're succeeding, not by the number of students they place in college, but by the number of students who succeed in college. And until they own that goal with you, it's going to be extremely difficult to reduce the need for remediation. And similarly, if we want to increase completion, we have to redefine what completion means, folks. To me, the associate degree is not completion. Now, I know that's where we are today, and that's what our governors are mandating. But our students don't come to us for associate degrees. They come to us because they're on their way to achieve a baccalaureate, or they want significant economic return for their effort, or both. And so the real completion is baccalaureate attainment and labor market outcomes that support sustainable wages for a sustainable family. And we can't do that by ourselves. That means redesigning systems with the universities so that we create new pathways, not just inside the institution, but across institutions. And I know that there are leaders here in Maryland that are committed to doing that. I know Brett Kerwin, and I've had many conversations about the university system working with community colleges to reduce the time that it takes to achieve the baccalaureate and reduce the cost to do that, and working across systems. But today we're going to talk about developmental education is within that broader context. And so you'll see that for us, and again, a common theme of working through and with achieving the dream, which gave us the discipline to do this work and gave us a learning community to share information with one another and find out that there were others that were experiencing the same problems. So the pre-collegiate programs, that is getting students before they ever come to you ready, how we do the assessment and onboarding of students, redesigned completely. Then within that context, developmental math and English completely redesigned. And then the advising and student success supports have to be redesigned. And then finally, you need a policy structure that supports all of that. I'm not going to go into all of those. I'm going to tell you our experience in developmental education and then something about the policies that we've adopted and some of the results. So our vision for the redesign in Virginia, not just Nova, was one, to reduce the overall need for developmental education, reduce the need for it. Secondly, to reduce the time that it takes students to complete developmental education. Our data were showing us that students who were persisting and not completing were taking 2+ years, and they still weren't getting out. And their chances of ever graduating were slim to none. And then finally, to increase the rate of success among those taking developmental education. In developmental education, the follow-on courses, and then completion. Those were our goals. So we took up the issue of developmental math redesign. And we recognized that we were asking students, one, to repeat what they had already taken, two, that we asked them to repeat what they already knew in many cases, and third, that we were asking them to learn content that was unrelated to what we were going to require them to know in their degree program. So our business students were learning, calculus-based mathematics when what they really needed were inferential statistics. And we're finding our liberal arts students were having the same requirement as our STEM students. And so what we decided to do was to break up math competencies according to what students were going to need to know to be successful, not repeating high school math. The second is that we recognized that our placement tests were not diagnostic. They were just placement tests. And so we, over the years, had gotten to the position that if a student looked like they might be weak in math, the default position was they need developmental math. And they needed the whole load of developmental math because we didn't know where they were weak and where they were strong, and because we weren't sure what part of math they were going to need. So by design, developmental math for us took a whole year. Oh, some students could complete it in less than that, but pretty much a whole year. And it was 5 credit hours. It was 10 credit hours on an annual basis, very expensive, extended one's college career by at least a year. So we broke this up into 9 units, and according to math competencies, and then we redesigned our assessment so that it became diagnostic, not a placement test. It became diagnostic, together with our faculty and other indicators of student readiness. And we designed, in effect, clusters of developmental math requirements according to the program that you're in. Within that, we had modules. In fact, we're using My Math Lab, and we worked with Carol Twig's redesign team, and we created significant assistance with technology through My Math Lab. And so if you're assigned to a particular cluster because you're in the liberal arts program, I think you have to master 6 units of math. You don't have to master the ones you've already shown that you can do, only the units that you don't. You must master each unit, not most of them, all of them. And so you don't go on to the next unit until you've mastered that. This is what it looks like as it's drawn out, which is that we have a cluster for STEM and business administration, a cluster for liberal arts, and then highly specialized according career and technical education, depending upon your program. So in the STEM fields, we had all 9 units broken into 2 parts. For the liberal arts students, you had 5 units that you needed to take. And then for the curriculum specific, like HVAC or electronics or engineering tech, that was designed specifically for your program. So each student had a different profile according to their assessment and according to the program that they'd be placed in. Here's what we have found so far. And we've been at this full implementation for a little bit over 2 years. We moved, one of the flaws in thinking about developmental education is to look at it out of context and say, how many of your developmental students are being successful? Step back a little bit. How many of your entering students are taking college-level math within the first year? Not how many of your developmental are successful. And we moved that from 56% of our entering students within 1 year were taking college-level math before, and now it's at 74%. So 3/4 of our students are taking college-level math in the first year. We found that those that were in developmental math, once again, completing developmental math is not a sign of success. It's only when they complete the college level course that it's success. I can pass people in developmental, but if we don't follow on and say, are they successful in college level, it doesn't matter. We found that with our redesign of the students that completed developmental, they performed in college level math the same as those who were college ready and didn't need developmental math. And then finally, and this would seem to be intuitive, but we had to discover it through trial and error, the students who need the least remediation are seeing the best results in the least amount of time. Now before, all of our students were taking the same amount of time minimum. You had to take the full thing. Now they don't. It's varied according to what your need is, and it's self-paced. Here's the big disappointment. The students who came in scoring lowest in developmental math are not showing any significant progress. It is, in effect, the students that are on the border, near the border of college readiness. And what we found through our assessment is that our old assessment process, we were keeping students out of college level subjects unnecessarily. What had happened is we had said, if it looks like you might be weak, the default position is you're in developmental. We've changed that. Now it says, if it looks like it's uncertain and you may be weak, the default position is college level with some support. And the early returns are, we're having more students in college level, right? And we have a higher percentage of college level not passing. But overall, more students are completing the sequence within the first year successfully than under the old system. That seems it's very difficult to watch this data interpret. So in other words, if we had 100 students coming in before, 60 of them had to go to developmental math. 40 of them went into college level math. Well, now it's very, very different. Before, those that were in college level math, we had like a 65% pass rate. Now it's a 60% pass rate. Sounds like we've actually declined. We haven't though, because there's so many more students in college level math. And so we've come to the interpretation that we ourselves had become a significant barrier to the success of our own students by having that default position be developmental math is where you go if it looks like you may be weak. Developmental English, again, a faculty-driven process, but came up with a different structure. What we did, we had been teaching reading and writing separately. We merged them. We merged them, said they're part of the same process. They're not separate efforts. And we created 3 levels of developmental English. One for those that scored very, very low. Once again, we did a diagnostic assessment, statewide assessment, and those that were at the lowest possible level took the most intensive part of a 1-year program called ENF1, Preparing for College English 1. In the first semester, if they made substantial progress, they could move to ENF2, where it was only 4 credits. And those that were on the borderline would take college-level composition with some support. So we did that redesign of our assessment statewide, created this new accelerated course sequence, and we found out that only 22% of our students placed in the full developmental math. Once again, our placement had been barring students from taking college-level English, just as it had in math. And so before, 38% of our students coming in were having to take developmental English, and now it was only 22%. As a consequence, our English composition, our students in college-level English skyrocketed statewide. And of those that were in developmental, 82% of them progressed to English 111 within the first year. Now this is still rolling out for us, and still I have lots of anecdotal information about why this is not working well from faculty. But the data don't bear that out. The data indicate that significantly larger numbers of students are in college level English and are completing it successfully. And so sorting that out is a very significant issue for us. None of this could have happened at Nova had we not made some fundamental policy changes, particularly for those students that we know from the data are at risk. And the largest single group at risk are our young, recent high school graduates. And so we, following the lead from several other colleges across the country, followed in their footsteps. And so for all recent high school graduates coming to Nova, in fact, anyone 23 years of age or younger, first time to Nova, is assigned not advising, but an advising specialist who will stay with that student through the entire experience. In fact, we've adopted this model, and if we have time later, I'll show you. We've adopted this model into the high school. We have advisors that we place in the high schools with at-risk students, and we follow those students all the way through the bachelor's degree. They have the same advisor through a case management process. But now we're requiring from all recent high school graduates that they have an advisor that they must meet with, that they must take the assessment before they're allowed to complete their registration. If they're assessed in developmental, it must be taken during the very first semester. Students must attend a required new student orientation. They must complete a student success course within the first 15 hours, and we've eliminated late registration. You must arrive to class on time. Here's what we found out. And again, you know, it doesn't take rocket science, but it does take trial and error. So we have, you know, in the notion that we have adult students who know what are best, we permitted students to come in to college during late registration and begin a class as late as the second week, so missing 3 or 4 classes, coming into class saying, did I miss anything important? Oh, I'm supposed to get a textbook too? Oh gosh, you know? And so you miss 2 full weeks of class. You know, the likelihood of that student passing that course and remaining in college was about 15%. And so, administrators who were enrollment focused, said, well, we've got to let them in to meet the enrollment target. But the fact was that it was not good enrollment management either. We were going to lose not only the student, but we slowed down the class. And our faculty adapted to that, which meant the first week really wasn't an instructional week. And so now everybody at the college is focused on being ready, class ready the first day. Everybody, not just the students now. We had to also coach the faculty. You're not going and handing out your syllabus saying, I'll see you next week. Everybody class ready the first day. And so all of those, together with our developmental education reform, we're beginning to see some very significant changes. Well, I'm going to stop there. Is the governor here yet? Not yet. Okay. I'll stretch a little bit. Okay. I have, basically I'm a classroom instructor, so I always have prepared more. So I told you about this notion of collective impact. This notion that we can't have really significant outcomes by trying to do things by staying inside the institution. I want to talk to you about one that we've been doing now for a decade called Pathway to the Baccalaureate. And that Pathway to the Baccalaureate is doing what I said, reaching into low-income, first-generation college-goers and immigrant and minority communities, and helping them prepare for college as early as the 10th grade. We'd like to do it earlier, and so I want to tell you the story of how, working with our schools, we've gotten these students not only into college, not only completing college, but moving into STEM careers where good paying jobs are, and completing the bachelor's degree. So the goal was to increase college attendance and baccalaureate completion of these particular populations I was mentioning. And we've used a highly structured case management approach that starts with our counselors in high schools, beginning in the 10th grade. Students are told, and their parents are told, if you come into this program and do what we say and complete it and graduate from NOVA, you are guaranteed admission to George Mason University, and we guarantee your completion of the bachelor's degree and that you will graduate without debt. Okay? This year we have 11,500 of these students involved. 55 high schools across our region. These students who were, according to national statistics, less than 20% were going to go to college. We have an 88% college going rate. And of those, 83% complete the baccalaureate within 3 years of leaving NOVA. This is the progression. Our partner in this collective impact is not just our schools, but also our university. Our joint goal together is to get these students over the goal line. So the brown boxes are our white students that were going to George Mason University. The green boxes are our non-white students. 90% of those are from the Pathway to the Baccalaureate program. All of our gains in transfer students to the university came as a result of that. And their success, as I've already indicated, is an 83% baccalaureate completion rate within 3 years. When you keep your eye on the ultimate goal, not the intermediate goal, completing developmental education is important, but not in and of itself. Completing the associate degree is important, but not in and of itself. Completing the bachelor's degree and moving into a career that can support a family, that's the outcome that we want. And we can't do it alone. It's only through working across organizational boundaries. Now, I'm very pleased to report that Montgomery College in Maryland has created its own version of this very same program. And it's early in stages. You know, it takes patience and urgency for this thing to work. You know, funders Gates Foundation wants to see within 3 years measurable results. Well, you know, it took us 10 years, and it was only in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th year that we began to see the needle move. Why? Figure it out. You start in the 10th grade, you're not going to see immediate results on the baccalaureate completion, right? And so it's taken us a decade. But now we send more transfer students, successful graduates from Nova, to George Mason University. We send more transfer students than they take freshmen now. And we're helping them complete their mission. They have a mission also that they got out of this, which was they needed to double the number of baccalaureate degrees they were granting to help meet their target, but they were getting their budgets cut. How were they ever going to do that? By doubling the intake of freshmen? By working with Nova, letting us do the heavy lifting, and the students we send them graduate at a higher rate than their own freshmen, right? And so for them it's good, for us it's good, for the schools it's good, for the students it's great, and we do great work for our community. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Templin. Let's give him another round of applause. Yes, great job. We are awaiting the governor's arrival, but I thought in the interim we could have Dr. Stout and Dr. Templin take a couple questions from the audience. I don't know if there's microphones, but it's a pretty small space. So while Dr. Templin's up here, is there a question for Dr. Templin? Dr. Stout?
I can do a soft shoe.
All right. They're pretty good. All right. Questions about the data? Very impressive. Yes, right here, sir.
Well, there are several things. You know, the requirements for successful leadership in community colleges today is substantially different than when Karen and I entered the field. And we're not preparing leaders that are focused upon outcomes, significant outcomes for student success. Most of us were raised in an environment where access and enrollment was what really was important. And so the first thing that trustees can do, and one of the things I'm going to be working on at the Aspen Institute, is that they can select presidents who are focused on student success. And then secondly, they can create the level of expectation with regard to how are we doing with regard to student success, and provide that very patient but unyielding expectation that what we are doing is too important for us to fail. What we're doing is too important for us to let 80% of our students not complete. And to have that patience at the same time while they have the expectation. But we've recently completed a study at the Aspen Institute that indicated that what trustees are looking for in a president is substantially unrelated to the competencies required for successful management of a student success agenda. We've got to bring that into alignment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Templin. He's here now, so we could have a seat and have him. The governor has arrived. Yes. Governor O'Malley, I wonder if you could come up on stage while I say a few things about all the good work that you have done for the state of Maryland. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes, all the good work, yes. Deserves a round of applause. And we know that in particular when we visit other states and we go, wow, we are so lucky to be in the state of Maryland. So Governor O'Malley, your steadfast dedication to keeping higher education accessible to all Marylanders truly distinguishes you among leaders of this great state. Your increasing support of Maryland's 16 community colleges through 2 terms as governor helped our institutions meet the ongoing challenge of providing affordable, quality, higher education and career development programs to 500,000 Marylanders every single year. Your focus on college completion recognizes Maryland's needs for a strong economy at home and a competitive workforce globally. The Drive to 55 college completion goal was the impetus for today's event, the MACC Completion Summit, now in its 5th year. Your support and our programs are working. We now mark 4 consecutive years of statewide growth in community college completions, 38% in associate degrees conferred, and 47% growth in college career certifications awarded. It is for these reasons and more that on behalf of Maryland's 16 community colleges, their Board of Trustees, and the 500,000 students we serve, I'm very pleased to present you with our Champion of Maryland Community Colleges Award.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, well deserved.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Thanks very, very much.
Yes, I'll let you go right into it. Okay.
Thank you. Kate, thank you very, very much. And thank you all for your work. It has been, let me put this here. It has been a tremendous honor and really an inspiration to be able to work with all of you. Not because times over these last 8 years have been easy, but because they've been hard and you chose to make progress nonetheless. And in fact, that's when progress is most needed. I love these 2 graphs. These graphs are shining examples of the most beautiful sight in all of state or local government. Graphs that are moving in the right direction. I love them. Sometimes I keep my favorite ones and just look at them for comfort in the car. It's, and what the comfort I derive from that is knowing that when you bring together a group of really committed people and you set the goal and you're willing to make yourself vulnerable as a leader by sharing with everyone what that goal is and the actions we need to take to get to it, it is amazing how much progress is possible, especially in times of cynicism when we're doubting whether we have the ability as a people to get anything done any longer. What we've shown in Maryland over these last 8 years that in fact progress is always possible. And you guys have really been doing some of the most important work of all. So Dr. Hetherington, thank you for your introduction and thank you for this honor. And thank you also for your leadership of Howard Community College. And thank you, Bernie Sadusky, for your work at the helm of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. And thank you, everyone, again, for your work. And I accept this award, really, it's on behalf of all of us who have had the honor in your state government of doing the work, whether it's people in the budget office or Jared and on the second floor in the governor's office or others who in the work that they do, while it might not seem that it's directly involved in your work, the fact of the matter is that it is. Those that work in public safety, those that work to create a more sustainable way of living in this beautiful but fragile estuary of the Chesapeake Bay, those who do the important work of improving the health of our people, including those moms and dads that come to you for the skills they need to better care for their families. So I'm about to be promoted to the rank of citizen. I will assume this highest rank in the land on January 21st, and whatever the future might hold, I want to implore you, encourage you to stay focused on that goal of 55% degree attainment. You've seen from the graph the progress that's possible, and the topic today, as Lincoln said, as our problems are new, so much as we think anew and act anew when it comes to creating more and better pathways for people to achieve college credit and degree attainment. We're actually the first state in the country. Our goal is to become the first state in the country with 55% of its population attaining a post-secondary degree by the year 2025. Right now we're 15%, as you may know, higher than the national average. And our community colleges, all of you have been at the forefront of this effort. And Marylanders everywhere who are looking to start a career or upskill, get the training they need to move up. In many instances, in most cases, the first places they look are their community colleges because of your good work. So how have we achieved what we have, and what steps can we take in the future? One of the truths that we have embraced as a people over these last 8 years is that no great people ever cut their way to prosperity. We have achieved a higher rate of job creation than our neighbors in Virginia or Pennsylvania since the recessionary low. And part of the reason for that is not only the tough fiscal decisions we've made, most of them singularly unpopular, but also because we've had the courage and the trust in one another to actually make the important investments to educate, to innovate, to rebuild that actually moves us forward. And to create jobs in a modern economy is going to require that we make better and smarter investments in giving our people the skills they need to do the jobs that are created in a new economy. Our progress over these last 8 years is particularly encouraging. Doctor, you mentioned the fact that you're particularly mindful of our progress when you travel to other states. I wish there were a plane big enough to put 5.7 million people in, that I could take the citizens of our state to see what hasn't been happening in other places, where over these last 8 years, some in other states decided that education was a luxury we couldn't afford in hard times, or that college affordability was something that we just couldn't afford to do anymore. We chose the opposite tack, making the largest investments we've ever had in K-12 education. And as a result, our public schools in Maryland, in the middle of the recession, never before, but in the middle of a recession and for 6 years in a row, were named the #1 public schools in America. And our successes in K-12 meant that we were preparing more Marylanders so that they'd have the skills they need by the time they graduate high school to come to your institutions without needing remedial or developmental help, though we still have a lot of work to do. I also want to thank you for the work that almost seems forgotten now. I remember when we first started down this road together in 2007, the hodgepodge of articulation agreements and how difficult it was when somebody would actually pay to take a course, get the credit, and then be told at one of our four-year universities, that one doesn't qualify here. So we still have more work to do there, but my goodness, we've come a long way since those early days. And get this, we have driven up STEM graduates by 37% since 2016. I'm not aware of another state that has done that, though they all claim to know that it's important. It's an essential piece of creating that workforce that we need. The other things that we've done to make college more affordable, holding in-state tuition to 0% increases, passing the DREAM Act so that every child, regardless of where their parents might stand, in the naturalization process, nonetheless, is able to equip themselves with the skills they need, because the more they learn, the more they will earn, and the better all of us will do. So progress is a choice, and job creation is a choice. Making these graphs move in the right direction. These were the products of the choices that all of you have made, and they've been better choices. So making sure they move in the right direction is critically important, doing more rather than less, so that we give our children a country with more opportunity rather than less. That's really what it's all about. Sometimes people talk about the American dream and they focus only on the fruits of that dream. But one of the greatest responsibilities or greatest privileges of freedom is the privilege to be responsible for creating more opportunities, for helping others, for caring. So I have great confidence in your abilities and in your leadership, and looking at that graph, those graphs just reaffirms it. So in closing, I just want to thank all of you for the work that you've done in this increasingly connected and interconnected and competitive world. And through some pretty challenging economic headwinds, our state is standing tall. Our state is moving forward and not back because of your work. We're a model to other states. And some of you that travel around, you hear the questions, how did you guys do that? It's not rocket science, but it does require work. And so much of that work is about giving our people the skills that they need in order to care for their families. So look, I didn't come to this office to stay, I came to make a difference. And because of all of you, we have made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. More than 700,000 people now have health care who didn't before. We've cut juvenile homicides in half. We have set a better table when it comes to restoring the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And our future is bright because the jobs of tomorrow are going to depend on our ability to innovate and to improve the way our people achieve the skills they need to succeed, the sustainability of our way of life, the health of our people, and the security of our people. We are very, very blessed. And two of the reasons we're blessed is to be able to live in the greatest country on the planet. And the other reason is that we live here in Maryland, that one state where, as Frederick Douglass said, we are one, our cause is one, and we must help each other if we are to succeed. Thank you for your great work.
Thank you very much, Governor O'Malley, and thanks for all the good work that you've done for the state of Maryland, particularly in higher education. We are closing our program, but before we do that, I'd like to give another round of applause to Dr. Karen Stout and Dr. Bob Templin for the great presentations they've done. Thank you very much.